Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do on the KidLit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature, picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels too. Whether you're an adult reading to your inner child or connecting the young readers in your lives with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll talk to a different children's literature author and discuss their books, their hopes and dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. So, grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of KidLit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the KidLit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie, your KidLit loving host, inviting you back for another weekly conversation with a children's literature author. Today, I'm talking with Hena Khan. Hena has been publishing books for children, including many that center on Pakistani American and Muslim characters for over 2 decades. From picture books, middle grade novels, and even graphic novels, her stories are often centered around culture, community, friendship, and family. Stories like one of my top favorites, Amina's Voice, Amina's Song, More to the Story, Behind My Doors, and many more that have been loved by readers. She's here today to talk about her newest release, a graphic novel titled We Are Big Time. And I may be just a little bit excited for this conversation, so we are going to get right to it. Hena, welcome to the KidLit Love podcast. I am beyond excited to talk to you today.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here too.
I cannot wait to jump in. But I just had to share, like when I read Amina's Voice, like when I work with teachers, I work with students, and I ask them to think about their reading history, like their trajectory of books that when they've read it, it has stuck with them, it has made a difference, they've had to pass it along to everyone. And when I think about my own reader's history, even reading children's literature as an adult, Amina's Voice is one of those books that is just front and center. Pass it along, share it with kids, share it with teachers. It truly changed the way I think and the way I try to be in the world and what I know about the world. Like it was just such a powerful book that opened so much for me that led to more and more and more books. So I just wanted to start with a big thank you because books can be such gifts, and yours, especially Amina's Voice, it's stuck right here in my reading heart for sure.
Thank you. That means everything to me. I really, really appreciate that. And it's so nice to hear.
You're so welcome. So let's start before we talk about We Are Big Time today. Let's rewind 20 years and have you tell us how did you get started? How did you start on your path to writing children's literature?
I owe it all to my friend Andrea Minotti, um who I've known since second grade. And she was working as an editor at Scholastic book clubs and asked me for some help way back. I mean, now like 23 years ago. And I she knew I was a writer. We had grown up writing together. And she asked me for some help with a series called Spy University. And she said, I don't know where this might lead, but could you maybe rewrite parts of this book? And I ended up rewriting a book, and it was a lot harder than I thought. Um, and it was my first time writing for kids because I, at the time, was writing for adults and not like technical writing, nothing fiction. And it was my first experience with that, but I realized, one, there was a child on the other side of that, holding that book at the end. And I studied the craft and how to, write in this new engaging way for young people and just loved it. And I ended up doing more writer for hire work. And that's what made me realize it was even a possibility. It would have never occurred to me if it wasn't for my friend.
Wow.
Then, of course, writing for these various series was a great way to start writing for children, but then I started thinking about the stories that I wanted to tell and the ones that I didn't have and the ones I wanted my children to have because I was a new mother at the time that I was doing all of this.
Wow. So one question by a good friend just kind of set you on a whole new path.
Yeah, yeah, really, and the trust that she had in me that I could do it, because I don't know if I would have had that confidence to ever say, "I'm going to write a children's book." But she knew me as a writer. We had, not only written together in our school newspaper, but we used to do all of our English assignments together, and, we both loved writing and loved reading, and so she remembered that, and I think that was the boost I needed.
Ah, so you started writing for hire, and then you said you had your own stories
Mm.
you wanted to tell. Tell me about that. What kind of stories, once you kind of got the bug, so to speak, what direction did you want to go in writing for kids?
I really didn't know, but I knew I wanted stories with characters that look like me and my kids in them. I knew that when I was growing up, I never saw myself in a book,
Mhm.
and wanted my children to have that experience. At that time, I had one child, and I wanted him to be able to go into, specifically, I thought of his school library and find a book that had a kid like him in it. Um, and I started off with, Night of the Moon, which came out in 2008. I came up with the idea for that when he was in preschool, and I realized there was nothing to introduce the Ramadan experience to children in a accessible, easy to understand way. So my first few books were very deliberate in a reaction to something that I saw, like a gap that needed to be filled. Um, and I think we see that in the market too. Publishers are responding to these very specific holes that they see. Um, but, it's been amazing to see the evolution from there to now being able to just tell stories that, aren't necessarily serving that purpose. I mean, they are in a larger sense, but, um, yeah, just that's where it all began, and it was really wanting those stories to exist.
Yeah. And that's where I think I have realized so much of my own privilege. I grew up always seeing
Mhm.
myself in stories. What do you mean? And it's such I know that we have a long way to go, but I'm just so grateful now that the kids that I work with, you know, I can make sure that everybody sees themselves inside a story, and on the same side, which is just as important, that you can also see someone else, right? You
Yeah.
get the gift of both in books.
Yeah, absolutely. And as someone who grew up only seeing other people, I know that you can feel so connected and so entrenched in a story about, people who are so different than you. I adored those characters and those stories, whether it was realistic fiction or fantasy or whatever it was. But it didn't matter that the characters didn't have lives that were exactly like mine. But there is something very powerful about seeing your experience
Yeah.
and your family portrayed on a page. And I definitely think we all need all of it to get to know each other and to feel seen and included.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that kind of leads me to asking you about the newest book. So, We Are Big Time, a beautiful graphic novel. I loved it.
Thank
What
you.
was the inspiration behind this book? And I know, because I read it and I read the end, but I want you to tell readers what the
Oh,
inspiration was behind this book.
thank you. Well, I live in a basketball obsessed household. And so I've written books. I have my Zaid Salim Chasing the Dream series that came out some years ago about a little boy who loves basketball, that's loosely based on my husband and son. Um, And so there was already that backdrop, and then, I was in Wisconsin for the State Reading Association meeting, and the educator, Eliza Werner, who was hosting me, sent me an article about the Salam School girls basketball team, and they had this amazing turnaround season, and knowing my interest in basketball, and she knew those other books, she said, "I thought you might find this interesting." And I did, and I thought it was so gripping. I started looking up other stories and realized that this team had gotten national attention for this incredible season, and there was just so much there. It just felt like a story that needed to be shared in book form. And I thought about it as a graphic novel because I was seeing these powerful images and videos of these girls, and I thought, I think this is the story that I want to tell in this format, because I'd been thinking about graphic novels and maybe wanting to write one, but this felt like the right story for that format.
Yeah.
And really all because of the article that she shared and realizing that, it was so captivating that I needed to go further.
So it's another example of one person putting something in your past that just
Yeah,
entices you and off you go.
yeah. Isn't that amazing? That so often it feels like that's how life works out for me, but yeah,
Yeah.
I'm so grateful to her, and then I reached out to the school, to see if it might be possible to talk to the coach or some of the players, and the person at the school connected me right away, to who the girls call Coach Cass, and she was amazing, so receptive and so open to talking with me, to connecting me with the girls right away. I interviewed 4 of the players from her team and her, and each of them just gave me such interesting insights into that season, into their own unique perspective and experience with it. Um, and I ended up writing this fictional version that sort of took pieces of their different, um, individual stories and personalities and things that the coach shared that I found interesting and fun, and then I wove in some fictional elements and things from my family history because my husband actually grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and we have a connection there, and that's where, I've said other books, so I was very happy to be able to tell the story, but it all grew out of that article and then the generosity of, everyone who was involved to share their story with me.
Yeah. Well, having read it now, I can see parallels in how you went about your research and investigating and interviewing the girls to this wonderful thing that happens in the story of the girls being able to share their story with a wider audience. So I love how those parallels just kind of fired in my brain as how you did that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you,
How
and what one of oh, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead, please.
I was just gonna say that, one of the things I found interesting was how they dealt with the media attention and the difference between, what we were seeing and maybe what they were actually thinking about and feeling. Because, and that was one of the questions I asked them, was what else would you want to tell me that wasn't shared? Or, was there anything about the coverage that you thought was or wasn't accurate or that type of thing? And that was something I felt like I could add to the story.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciated that because you could kind of the beauty of a novel in general, but I think especially the beauty of a graphic novel where you can really see and visualize. You know what's going on in the story. You know those elements, you know the plot, you know what's happening, but you also get a view into the reader's mind
Mhm.
that other characters don't know about. So you kind of get that inside look. And I did really gravitate towards that thread as a reader without giving spoilers. It's always so hard to explain the parts that jumped out at me without spoiling them for readers, but just kind of reading about that inner dialogue of what some of the girls were thinking during that time of the media of,
Mhm.
well, why did they ask this? And why might it have been asked this way? And what did you think? And that was such a learning experience in of itself
Mhm.
and getting their message and kind of changing the way, the media typically portrays them. I really enjoyed that part. I felt like it was such a deep layer that I got to witness and learn about, especially seeing the characters. I just felt so connected to them. Illustrations are gorgeous, and you just get that emotion off the page.
Thank you. Yeah, I love the illustrations. Sophia did an amazing job. Just the lines and the energy and
The
the
energy,
animation, like
yes,
you
it's
said.
the
Yeah.
energy. You really can feel it on the page, the whoosh, the basketball moves. You really can, as a reader, kind of get so invested in.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it. I think she did a great job, and just even capturing the diversity of the team and the girls' features and expressions, and yeah, I thought she did an amazing job.
Yeah. I also love too, while obviously basketball was a very strong theme, there were a lot of other entry points for readers, right? There's moving and starting over in a new location. There's joining a team for the first time. There's also friendship and some friendship tensions. What does she think? Well, what does she think? And I think
Mhm.
the one that jumped out at me, because this is something that I struggled with as a child and, I still do as an adult, which is this perfectionism and
Mhm.
looking back at my own self with a different lens that maybe others see. So,
Yeah.
Aaliyah is very hard on herself. and
Mhm.
gets very nervous about things. And I loved in this one moment where the coach said, "Let's just look at the facts here. Are you beating yourself up over something that, isn't really there?" And that was a huge moment for me as an adult human, not just a reader,
Oh,
but, oh, I'm
thank you.
probably doing this too in all sorts of aspects of my life. And so I really loved how you had so many different layers and entry points that a reader could find themselves in, kid or adult, because this adult found that very important.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what I love about KidLit, right? We do have so many opportunities for, reflection as an adult reader too. And some of the things, even if it's through the perspective of somebody younger, like we're all still grappling with these same issues.
We are.
And
We are.
I'm so glad to hear you say that too, because you know, that's what I love writing. Why I love writing about sports and hope to keep doing it is I do think it's, just one of those entry points, but I do feel like some of the sports books of my youth, were so heavily sports
Right.
centric that that's all it was. And if you weren't a huge fan of baseball or whatever sport was being featured, you really couldn't invest in the story.
Yeah.
And for me, it's always a piece of a narrative, in a way to, a tool really for telling another story. And that's where, I'm so glad you said that because, the being hard on yourself part was something I related to as well, and Coach Cass did mention that to me when we spoke as one of the players, um, reacting that way and doing what she does in the story, which is take her aside and show her stats, and so I thought
Yeah.
if I that connected with me so much, I thought maybe others would identify that in themselves as well.
I think a lot of us will find that in ourselves. And it was just such a nice reminder, that what we don't always have to believe what we think. And in fact, things may be they may be an easier way to be on ourselves. And I loved that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was I'm really, really grateful that she said it, and that was something I could weave in, and it was interesting because I had an interview with, a Milwaukee-based publication, and the interviewer, a journalist, asked me, "Why didn't you write this as a nonfiction?" Since I
Mhm.
was interviewing the coaches and the players, and I realized it hadn't even occurred to me until she said it, because as soon as I learned of the actual team, I thought, "Oh, I wanna write a story like this," but I
Right.
didn't necessarily wanna narrate the exact same, experience of one person, um, and I realized that, writing fiction gave me that freedom to pull the parts that I found the most interesting and,
Right.
add the layers that I wanted to, and then because for a second I was like, "Oh, no, should I have?" And then I sat back, I was like, "No, no, I think I'm okay." And this
There's
is the
that
story I wanted.
perfectionism, right? There's what we were just talking about, kind of coming back up.
Exactly. Um, but I think, yeah, it was nice to be able to not have it be one particular person, but it was cute because she said, oh, she interviewed one of the actual players from the team that I had talked to, and she said, "Oh, she felt like it was her story." And I said, "Well, that's great. Like I take that as a compliment because, whatever parts of her life or experience I put in were enough to make her feel like it was her,
Yeah.
even though it was truly a composite."
Yeah. That's the beauty of a book, right? We find what we need. At least I
Mhm.
think we find what we need and we find those parts of ourselves.
Absolutely.
How was writing a graphic novel? How did that differ from perhaps your process of writing some of your more narrative pieces? Because that's different. That's a big change. How was that?
It was fun, definitely very, very different. The only experience I had earlier with writing comics was well, I was very lucky to have this experience, but it was very different, was with DC Comics and a talent development workshop they did back in 2016, and I was part of the pilot group of people who were being taught how to write superhero comics, and I had
Wow.
no experience with the format. Everyone else in the class actually was, somehow more experienced than me. Some were graphic novelists and some were, comic writers, but just not superhero comics. I knew nothing about the genre whatsoever. So it was amazing to understand how to write in this way. And that was definitely a gift going into this experience was having the mechanics of it down. But in terms of the actual storytelling, it was different writing a 200-page graphic novel versus a 20-page comic. And of course, not a
Right.
superhero theme. And for me, I think the biggest difference was thinking, of course, thinking visually and thinking in frames or snapshots and trying to build a larger story. But also, I'm an outliner generally when I write a novel, and I don't have super detailed outlines, but I do go chapter by chapter, like what I want to have happen roughly. And that changes, of course, when I write. But in this case, I was definitely thinking in terms of acts, more like a film. And and I wrote out a synopsis of what I wanted to have happen in each act before I started writing, to try to build that tension and have the resolution and have, because it all just did feel so cinematic.
Yes.
It was a very different type of writing for me, but really fun to get to play with. And then, of course, my editor helped me figure out things I hadn't considered. And when I first wrote it, and then I was like, oh, okay, I need to consider page turns and where we're beginning and move things around and things like that. Um, so that was she was amazing too. And then seeing Sophia bring it to life was
Right.
just incredible because you're like,
Right.
this was all in my imagination and here it is. Um, so and as someone who wrote picture books before and still do, like I knew not to be prescriptive when it came to the art. I had learned that, oh,
Right.
only the most sparing of notes for the illustrator, let them do their thing, and this is so different because you get to be as descriptive as you want and dictate what's going to happen in every panel. And then, of course, the artist still brings themselves and may interpret, how they want to shape the panel. Maybe this one's going to be diagonal instead of a
Yeah.
box and that kind of thing. So there's still so much room for the illustrator to be creative, even though you are offering the specifics. Like in this panel, Aaliyah should look disappointed, um, and then how she interprets that, of course, is her own vision.
Yeah. I love how you said the energy earlier because you can feel the energy, the movement because of those very careful, creative, I don't know how they figure it out, but they do kind of
Mm,
kind of moves.
mm.
And it really just brought the story to life even more.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know it's an art form that really is, I think, underappreciated sometimes. I think, one of the things I really appreciated about the class that I took was studying comics and close up and really taking the time to look at the art and how that elevates the story. And I think for a lot of, readers or parents of readers out there who maybe are dismissive of graphic novels, and I know we've come a long way in terms of accepting them as literature and as, important books for kids to read. I think there's still probably a group of people who are like, "Well, my kid read it in an hour," like, but, I do think there's something really magical about the way everything comes together and like a picture book, 2 creative minds coming together, but there is in the graphic novel so much opportunity to really pick up on the nuances of the story and the things you were mentioning, like, the emotion and the energy of the page or, the unspoken aspects too. And it really does require a reader to be on top of all of that. Like you can breeze through it, but if you really take your time to appreciate the art and what's being told there too.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's something you can keep going back to and enjoy, over and over again and see something new each time.
Yeah, it's like some of our favorite movies, right? We can watch them a bunch of times and take away something else that we didn't focus on, whether it was an expression or something in the background. I do find I'm not a big rereader in general. I love rereading sections and beautiful lines and beautiful quotes, but I do find that in a graphic novel, picture books especially, I will read and then reread and then see something later and go back, and I agree with you. We're coming a long way, probably still have work to do and just smashing that stereotype that graphic novels are not your, typical reading. There is so much work that a reader does to make even more connections and more information with it that I'm just so glad that we're getting more graphic novels out there on important topics. Not that superheroes aren't important comics, but now we have so much more where we can enjoy that genre. And I find
Yeah.
as an educator, sometimes starting with that graphic novel can be the jumping point to,
Mhm.
oh, maybe I want to read a narrative about this. I want to read a chapter book or I go to a piece of poetry. And I feel like it could be a gateway to other longer forms of text, at least in my experience with kids.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope so. I believe that very much too. And we're seeing so many creative ways of integrating, graphic content with other types of books and merging and yeah, I think it's really exciting to see what people are coming up with.
Well, speaking of that, do you have any other projects coming up that you want to kind of drop here and let us know about before we sign off?
Oh, thank you. Well, this was a big publishing year for me. So this was book number 4 for 2024 for me, which has never happened before. So I had a contemporary middle grade drawing Dina come out in February, a picture book called Behind My Doors, and an anthology of South Asian American writers called The Doors Open, interlinked short stories that I edited. And then this is book number 4, which I'm super excited about. And in November, I have a co-authored book with Sarah Milanowski, book 4 of her Best Wishes series. It's called Like a Boss, and it was really, really fun to write together and very funny. So it's actually very good timing coming out in November because there's something else going on then. And it's about a girl growing up in Washington, DC, where, close to where I live. And she makes a wish with this magic bracelet to be in charge and is suddenly in charge of way more than she anticipated. So, but lots of antics and silliness, but very fun to write. So, I'm excited about that too. Yeah, and it's nice to have different types of books for different types of readers out there.
Mhm.
Going back to what we were just saying. So, hopefully, something for everyone.
Yes, definitely. And I do have to say, Behind My Doors, I loved that book. A
Oh,
book told from the perspective of the oldest library. Yes, please, right to a reader's heart. So if listeners, if you haven't read Behind My Doors, that is the next picture book that I think any podcast lover listening to a book podcast needs to have.
thank you. I appreciate
Where is the best place that listeners could find you online or perhaps social media if they want to learn more? Grab all those great resources you have on your website. Where should we
that.
send
Yeah, thank you. So just my name, henakhan.com. My dear friend from middle school onward designed my website for me, recently redid it for me. So there's lots of video content, like you said, educator resources, fun stuff for kids, and details about all my books. For events, I try to be good about updating Instagram, which is probably where I'm most social on social media, but not as much as, some others. But
it?
that's just at Hena Khan Books. And I do post about upcoming events, and I will be in lots of different places in the upcoming month. So I would love to meet some of you listening out there in person. Um, and excited to be at the National Book Festival in DC and other places. So yeah, please do connect.
Yeah. Well, one day I'll show up there with my stack of books of yours that you find.
Please do. That would be amazing. Where
Thank
are
you
you
so
based out of?
much.
I don't think I know where you're based out of.
I am in upstate New York,
Oh, okay. Lovely.
not too far.
Yeah, nice.
Thank you so much for coming and talking to us today about your books. I'm so excited and I so appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to chat with you, and thank you for your kindness and all the nice things you had to say about books in general and my books. It means a lot.
Of course. And listeners, thank you so much for listening to another episode of KidLit Love, and I will see you inside the next one. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the KidLit Love podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a bookish friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of Kid Lit Love. Thanks for listening.